Nightingale, Empowering Nurses Through the Performing Arts, the Impact of Attending a Musical about Florence Nightingale. Hi, I'm Connie Amundson with the Department of Scandinavian Studies at the University of Washington. This presentation reports on a phenomenological study exploring the impact on nurses and nursing students and professors of viewing a performance of Nightingale, a musical regarding the life and passion of Miss Florence Nightingale. With the support of several nursing schools and organizations, it toured the Seattle area this past winter. Nightingale was written and produced by Pamela Gerke and received additional support from Hearts, Health Enriched by the Arts. Unfortunately, the shutdown in response to the COVID-19 pandemic meant that the tour was cut in half. Luckily, my research team and I had by then conducted sufficient interviews to provide rich material for our qualitative assessment. Before I get into the details of the study, I would like to share a few brief quotes that highlight some themes which have emerged about the impact of the musical. One respondent said, "It was a very healing experience for me." And another said, "It made me more proud." And again, it felt nice to have this acknowledgement. It felt empowering. Seeing the musical and being interviewed also gave nurses a chance to reflect on their profession and their role in it. One said, "Nursing has given me my voice." And another, "It reminded me about fulfilling our great purpose here on this earth." Using a phenomenological approach and a theater reception framework, our team conducted a qualitative study of nurses and nursing students and professors who had attended the musical. Our goal was to do 6 to 12 semi-structured, in-depth interviews. In addition, we did a 10-question online demographic survey to which 38 attendees of a total of 161 responded. A convenient sampling was carried out as respondents for both parts were recruited in the lobby of the theaters before each performance. The performance and interview process was cut short due to the COVID-19 shutdown, but we did manage to do 12 interviews in all, 9 of which were with nurses or nursing students or professors. Before I move into what we gleaned from the interviews, I would like to give a very brief summary of the demographics of our audiences. Their ages spanned, as you can see, from 18 to 66 or older, with the bulk being in the middle of that range. Gender broke down to 83% female, 14% male, and 3% non-binary. As is typical of theater audiences in general, most respondents placed themselves in either the middle class or the upper middle class. Most of our respondents had college degrees ranging from 2-year degrees to the PhD level or other doctorate. And somewhat surprisingly, most respondents attend live theater or musicals quite frequently, with 8% once a week, 26% once a month, 55% a few times a year, and only 11% almost never or never. Next, I'd like to give a little background about Florence Nightingale, and then I will share with you in more detail some of the themes which are emerging from our analysis. I'm going to quote extensively from our interviews, thereby allowing nurses to have their own voice. And you will notice that for interviews done after the pandemic, that situation had become an abiding presence in some of their lives. To begin, Florence Nightingale was born 200 years ago, and the World Health Organization has declared 2020 the International Year of the Nurse and Midwife, in celebration of which she contributed to the field of nursing. In defiance of the norms of her upper-class background, she became a nurse and immediately demonstrated her leadership skills. When cholera broke out in London, she significantly lowered the death rate in the hospital by instituting a strict hygiene. As the Crimean War continued, the appalling conditions of hospitalized soldiers raised an outcry among British citizens, and Florence was asked to organize a corps of nursing to tend to the sick and fallen soldiers in the Crimea. She quickly assembled a team of 34 women from religious orders and sailed with them to the Crimea just a few days later. To paint a picture of what she found there, the hospital sat on top of a large cesspool which contaminated the water and the hospital building itself. Patients lay in their own excrement on stretchers strewn through the hallways. Rodents and bugs scurried past them. The most basic supplies, such as bandages and soap, grew increasingly scarce as the number of ill and wounded steadily increased. Even water needed to be rationed. More soldiers were dying from infectious diseases like typhoid and cholera than from injuries incurred in battle. Nightingale procured hundreds of scrub brushes and asked the least infirm patients to scrub the inside of the hospital from floor to ceiling. One of the scenes in that musical that many of our informants mentioned was based on a letter written home by one of the soldiers in the hospital. One of the nurses we interviewed had this to say with a sense of irony about how a nurse is seen by wounded soldiers. Having worked with veterans, I could relate to the things she was doing in the Crimean War. That person who comes and helps you is totally seen as the savior. I think the nursing professional takes a lot of that on, and I think it was beautiful in the show, but it also caused a little snicker among the nurses who were actually in attendance watching. My former classmates and I all kind of just looked at each other and acknowledged, yes, it's fun to think about the idea of the angel nurse. But at the end of the day, we are wiping butts and we are dealing with blood and snot and mucus and vomit. It's funny that society thinks that's what an angel is. Another response we often heard from nurses was about the tremendous amount of work that they do, because they are in the nexus among other clinicians, family members, administrators, and of course the patient. The nurse is the coordinator of care, and so they're communicating with doctors, physicians' assistants, nurse practitioners, unit secretaries, and then bosses and management and family members. Nurses are being asked to do so many more jobs than they originally signed up for, including cleaning beds and cleaning rooms and maintaining things. Yet they feel obligated to rise to the occasion lest their primary concern, the well-being of the patient, is overlooked. When you're really new, you might not pick up on the changes that are happening to a patient, to see the downward spiral, but you're going to learn quickly. After the war in 1856, Nightingale left Scutari, and with prize money from the British government, she funded the establishment of St. Thomas Hospital, as within it, the Nightingale Training School for Nurses. She never fully recovered from the Crimean fever, but continued to work as an advocate of healthcare reform. She died in 1910 at the age of 90. After seeing the musical, one nurse reflected back on her career in which she stayed in direct patient care. She has turned down many offers to become a nursing administrator. After seeing the musical, she wondered whether by doing so she had let Florence down. I want to stay by the bedside. That's where my passion is. And I think to myself, would that be okay by Florence? Would she, not have I let her down, but have I let myself down? Should I be going further? But I don't have the passion for anything else. I have the passion for being at the bedside. And I think that's what she did as well. Although in later years, when she became so ill that she couldn't, nevertheless, she was a prolific writer. But what nursing has done for me is given me my own voice, given me my own path, and it's been amazing. Learning more about Nightingale's advocacy for patients gave one informant the opportunity to reflect on what it takes to speak up and what, in the end, motivates her to do so. Seeing the musical kind of solidifies that when you have something to say in a meeting, you need to put your hand up and say something. I was actually in a meeting today, and it was about coronavirus. And I was thinking of Florence, and I was actually thinking, what would Florence do? And I said, okay, Dr. So-and-so, you tell me. I'm worried about this patient. They need to be swabbed for coronavirus. So I need to know which swabs, where I'm swabbing, the paperwork, how it's going to be transported. And they were, okay, I hadn't thought about that. And I said, so let's play devil's advocate. Say we've got somebody who is positive. What am I going to do with them? Am I going to send them back to their dorm? Are they okay to go back to their apartment or their fraternity? What do we do? The others hadn't thought about that. They're not walking the patient's shoes. And I think that's certainly what Florence, watching the play, where she was so clearly torn up with watching those soldiers and the way they were dying and the way they were being mistreated. And I think the day that you lose that as a nurse is the day you got to get out of nursing. Many things about medicine and nursing have changed over the years, but some aspects have stayed the same. Here's one example of how nurses reflected on that. It is the same story in a different time period, dealing with the status of medicine now versus the status of medicine in the early 1800s or mid-1800s. But we're still humans. We're still dealing with evolution. We're still dealing with the cry of humanity and the needs of humanity. And we are those people who come in response to that longing and that cry that we are able to hear and we respond to. One informant had another take on evolution, this time on a more personal level. She found that her work as a nurse has evolved into healing through the expressive arts. Whether or not this nurse is aware of being part of the larger movement of using the creative arts as a tool for the promotion of health, she has allowed her own creativity to lead her on a path which honors her nursing background and takes it in a novel direction. I am now moving into expressive arts, which allows people the opportunity through the arts, their own self-created art, to identify the problem themselves and to find a way through themselves. I create a safe container now, but I do not have to actually give them the plan. They will come up with their own plan out of the process of doing their own art and connecting with their own creative source. Florence Nightingale considered this future and wrote, "What we have made of it, whether all these things are the same then as now, or worse or better, depends of course upon what we are doing now, or upon what we are not doing now." Here are some nurses' reflections on the past, the present, and the future. One nurse was drawn to the idea of being in full possession of herself as a way to fulfill nurses' purpose. There were certain phrases in that musical that really rang true for me. One of them was when she spoke about being in full possession of herself and fulfilling our greatest purpose here on this earth. And if I could go back and hear or read the script again, I could pull out all of those phrases because I heard them very clearly. That's because this is something that interests me greatly. Sovereignty, the ideal of sovereignty. Another shared something that she and her friend both felt about their profession. It reflects for both of us how we felt in our jobs. It's relevant because we went into our jobs to make a difference. And I think most nurses go into their jobs as a service, or whatever you want to call this job. It's a way to make a difference. And I think that was what she showed. It just made me more proud, I suppose. Another nurse wondered what Florence would do in her situation. Seeing the musical made me ask, what would Florence do? Because today we are still fighting the same fights. The hospital should not harm the sick, and we're still struggling with rationing and quality care, and even basic hand washing, and not overdoing antibiotics. I mean, there are so many things that have changed, but really they haven't. So it was nice to have that reminder. What would Florence do? The musical inspired this nurse to reflect on the future of medicine and what she would do if she could wave a magic wand. She viewed the future as needing a holistic approach and criticized the American system. I would change the paradigm of medicine for profit to medicine for human service, the service of mankind. And anymore, it's not just mankind, it's medicine for the planet, for all of life, for humanity. And we are only a part of a much greater picture. And this involves everything. It involves our food, it involves how we think, it involves our economies, it involves how we treat the earth. Seeing ourselves as intimately part of that. And it's a very huge thing, but the biggest obstacle everywhere to this is the profit-making motive driving everything. In conclusion, I would like to dedicate this presentation to the heroes of the COVID-19 pandemic, especially the nurses. Medicine may have become more highly technological, but care for the patients still means toughing it out no matter what is thrown at you. Here is what one nurse said, who was interviewed after the pandemic struck. Every single nurse I know goes above and beyond, goes the extra mile. We do this extra stuff because it's important. And nursing, it's not a job. You have to have heart in order to do it, at least to do it in the long term. Thank you.